For most of us, hearing is something we just do and don't really think much about. But what if I told you there is more than one way to hear? The most common form of hearing and the most well-known is called air-conducted sound. In other words, sound waves travel through the air and vibrate our eardrums. The eardrums transfer these vibrations to the cochlear fluids. The cochlea transforms the vibrations of the liquids into a neural signal that is picked up by our auditory nerve, which transmits these signals to our brain and interprets the noises we hear. However, there is another way we can hear, through our bones. This type of hearing is called bone conduction, and how it works is actually fairly simple. When something causes the skull to vibrate, this vibration is picked up by the cochlear fluids, transformed by the cochlea, passed on to the auditory nerve, and then to our brain, bypassing the eardrums altogether. This is actually the method that whales used to hear. While it may seem like a novel concept, humans have actually known about this method of hearing for centuries. Ludwig van Beethoven, the famous musician, used this type of hearing when playing the piano back in the 1700s. He was almost completely deaf, but he was able to hear the sound of his piano through his jawbone by attaching a rod to his piano and clenching it in his teeth. We do know a bit more about bone conduction today than we did in the 1700s. One of these discoveries is that there are two main types of bone conduction. The first is high-frequency bone conduction. A vibration that is 1500 Hz or above is called a high-frequency vibration. Hertz is a unit of measure describing the number of cycles the sound wave goes through in 1 second. At these higher frequencies, different bones that make up the skull vibrate separately, in segments. These separate vibrations transmit to the cochlear fluids and then onto the brain. At lower frequencies, 1500 Hz and below, the skull moves as one rigid body, and thus transmits sound a bit differently. Instead of creating fluid compressions like before, it moves a different part of the ear called the oval window, which creates the sound heard by the brain. This lower frequency bone conduction is called inertial bone conduction. So why is this information useful? Well, hearing loss is a very common condition that is usually due to damage to the eardrum. Bone conduction devices, a type of hearing aid, can perform the role of the eardrum, decoding sound waves from the air and converting them into vibrations that can be transmitted through the skull directly to the cochlea. They increase the quality of sound that a person hears since they are bypassing the damaged eardrum altogether. And these devices are non-invasive. Bone conduction hearing devices are useful to those without hearing damage too. The devices can be used to listen to music or podcast, similar to headphones, except with higher quality sound, such as these bone conduction glasses and bone conduction Bluetooth headphones. As you can see, all of the vibrating mechanisms on these devices are placed near the temporal bone, the bone about an inch behind the back of our ear. This is the optimal bone conduction placement since these bones are closest to the cochlea. However, a vibration anywhere on the skull bones will transmit sounds to our ears.